and welcome to a bonus episode of the Davies or Davis podcast. We're not going to do an opening bit because that's effort, and this is just a tiny little slither of the bonus episode where we're going to be wrapping up our conversation about queer as folk. Hi, Louis.
Hi, Zac.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm very excited for our mini bonus episode. We have quite a lot of exciting stuff in store for you. We've got some of your thoughts that we're going to be discussing. I've got a big apology before I get cancelled, and Louis mashed together some of the best bloopers from the series. So let's get going.
Yeah. So, Zac, have you done anything interesting since we last met? First off,
No. I'm going to be quite blunt for the listener. No. I mean, I'm sure I have. I've just been working away. I just live that kind of life. I mean, I went to a Royal Television Society event this week and met loads of cool people that work in TV and was reminded how hard it is to get into television and how I still need to keep working hard. So I don't know if that's exciting. That was exciting to me, but also I do just keep working hard. What about you, Louis? Please save us from me being boring and not doing anything exciting.
I mean, to me, that sounds fun just because I've always been kind of intrigued by the media industry. But but last week I went to see a Grace Petrie gig with my friend. If you don't know Grace Petrie, she is a folk singer who does a lot of good stuff about being queer, being political. It was such an amazing gig, sort of in Brighton. And Zac, do you want to guess what the name of her 2018 album is? Just by any chance?
No, I've got what? Wait. Maybe Petri Dish.
No.
No, okay, no, I've got no idea then.
Give you a clue. She does folk music and folk inspired music.
So is it Queer as Folk?
It's Queer as Folk. Yes. Yes, but this gig was for her new album, Build Something Better. But yes, her 2018 album, Queer as Folk, was a blast. And I thought, okay, well, that's something we need to mention on the wrap up bonus program, before we have to forever hold our peace and move on to other TV.
I kind of you were giving me this sort of look over the camera as if you were saying, come on, the answer's obvious. Why would I be talking about this on the podcast? No, that's shame on me. I should have guessed that.
And then with my friend who's staying over that weekend, we were following the Six Nations because last weekend, for record, so she's half Welsh. She supports the Welsh rugby team, as do I. And Wales lost against Italy, which already is bad because if you're losing against Italy, you're not in a good place. But not only did they lose against Italy last week, that meant that they lost against every other country in the Six Nations, earning them the wooden spoon. So we had to accept the wooden spoon as Welsh supporters.
Ha. I suppose, Louis, if we crack on, my first question to you is: did you like Queer as Folk?
I liked Queer as Folk. I like Queer as Folk a lot. Okay, you're doing gestures at me.
It's a discursive podcast. I want to be tell me why. To quote the Backstreet Boys, tell me why.
So, I like Queer as Folk because it presented us with a sort of framework for a small society, the Manchester gay scene. It showed what the rules of this society were. It's a bit like in the first June movie where you sort of discover the Freeman and how they do things, and there's a real logic to it. And so you end up sort of entering this world, and then people have to sort of exist in it and navigate through it. The way that you can have TV shows about people navigating through more well-known worlds like office life or suburban living, I don't know. But this was Manchester's gay scene, and so the world it was in, the world it was in, felt very rich. And then the actual specific characters we were following were also very well developed, and so I thought it was a joy to follow their story and let it sort of influence our story of the podcast.
If you were to ask me if I enjoyed the show, it would be an obvious yes. And if you were to make gestures at me to get me to extrapolate upon that answer, I think I'd follow very similar lines along you. For me, I'm captured by the style of narrative. Now, I think I said this very briefly at the end of the previous episode, but we talk a lot about how Queer as Folk is pretty groundbreaking in terms of its queer storytelling. But I think it's pretty groundbreaking in the way that it sort of sets up its own narrative and sort of... You watch a lot of television with traditional beginning, middles and ends, and I think there's a place for beginning, middles and ends, and all stories should actually have beginnings, middles and ends, and Queer as Folk has beginnings, middles and ends. But it tells that story in a way that doesn't feel predictable. You don't know what's going to go around the corner and come around the corner, and yet nothing feels ridiculous and stupid. Everything feels in character, and I can imagine sitting down and figuring out what happens next for Russell T Davies is a lot of fun. It feels like he's led by these people and just led by the idea of, what if this thing happens? Ooh, that's juicy drama. Ooh, that's a lot of fun. And it's a sort of, I think, quite rare piece of television that is just a joy to watch, where you finish an episode and you go, I want to know what happens next. And that's not because there's some big mystery box that needs unpacking. It's just because I'm so invested in what are these characters going to do next.
Yeah.
And I think that's a triumph in craft.
It's what happens next and not why did they do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like mystery boxes, why did they do that?
Although I suppose there were moments where I did want to go, ooh, why did Stuart do that crazy thing? I want to see what he does next to hopefully understand more about his psychology. And often I'm left thinking, okay, he's an odd character. There's a sort of, if you read the Wikipedia page for Queer as Folk, there's a quote from the producers, which I presume means Nicola Schindler and Russell T Davies, essentially saying that the three leads in this show are less characters and people in and of themselves and more archetypes of gay men. But that doesn't sit right with me, because these characters have such psychological nuance. It's unbelievable. Like, particularly Stuart, who just does this batshit crazy stuff, but you really think that there's some kind of tortured soul that's kind of lost and doesn't quite know what he's doing in there. And yes, that he's supposed to be this experienced player kind of character, but I think there's a lot, you could have gone with a lot more basic archetypal version of that character if I think anyone else was writing it and they were taking that model. So that, just for me, what a masterpiece in writing, and it's no surprise to me that people want to see these characters again. And finishing that show, I think I want to see those characters again. I think there's a lot more story potential for 25 years down the line for these characters. But that's our opinions. You've heard our opinions enough. Louis, do you have an opinion from a listener or someone that you know?
So I have one from my parents. I asked them about the show. And what's interesting is all their comments on it weren't about the characters themselves, but were about the context in which it came out. You know, what was happening in 1999. Which is interesting, because that's not something we've talked about so much, because we haven't really been in a good position to talk about it. And so, you know, we're working to our strengths here, and knowing what the world was like before we were born is not going to be one of them. But they said, so basically it was very new, and they had been living in Montreal with like gay friends and family. That's in Canada, by the way. They knew about a gay scene, kind of similar to Manchester. You know, Montreal is maybe a bit larger than Manchester, but not if you take just like the bit that's on the island. There's but suburbs off island. It's the whole thing. Montreal is a massive island. That's what I mean by that. So it's kind of that thing of like, it's a big city, but it's not the biggest city, and it has this gay scene, and especially where they were living was near there. And then they came back to the UK, and seeing this scene depicted, it wasn't like a new thing to them, but it was they still saw that, oh wow, this is on TV now, that's pretty good. It was Channel 4, so sort of they have historically been the channel to push these boundaries and like try and sort of make shows about things that weren't really being covered before, and almost confrontational, and apparently controversial for a lot of people. Big surprise, but they were fine. they wanted to stress they were fine with it, because they're cool. And it also, so it was interesting coming off the back of all the like various Tory stuff in the 80s. And so you think like Section 28 and all that. So they talked for a little while, and then the thing I noticed was that, like, wow, they are just talking about its context. And I think they did watch the episodes, but sort of Stuart didn't stick with them, for example, the way that I think he's stuck with us. And yeah. And then I said that, like, basically we've kind of been focusing on it almost as like a 1999 period piece, you know?
Fascinating.
What about you, Zach? What comments do you have from people?
I have a comment from a listener. I don't know this listener, but they've got a problem with me. This comes from Jack. Fantastic name. And Jack says, Zac claims that the mention of a club card in an early episode of Queer as Folk means Vince works in a Tesco. But in the final episode of Queer as Folk 2, Vince mentions Tesco as one of his workplace's competitors. Furthermore, although unclear due to the 90s camera quality, all the supermarket workers wear a green badge displaying the supermarket's name. The people demand an apology from Zac regarding this misinformation. Well, Jack, I think the people deserve this apology that they demand, so I will say I'm sorry for attempting to push some agenda that Vince works in a Tesco when evidently he didn't. I kind of had suspicions that he didn't after I said it, and you're right, the sort of that badge is green, and I have spent my time staring at the screen trying to figure out what it says, and I can't for the life of me figure it out. But you're right, he definitely doesn't work in a Tesco. I'm gonna take a gander and say that the production team designed their own sort of badge and made it a fictional supermarket. I did find out, though, that the supermarket that they filmed in is actually an Asda, and is still an Asda to this day. It's Asda Hume, just outside the city centre of Manchester, which I think surprised me. I would have thought it'd be a set, but I suppose it's quite an easy thing to film in more cheaply than it is to build a supermarket.
Yeah, if they film at night or something.
Yeah, exactly after the supermarket. Although I think I have my suspicions that this Asda now is a 24-hour Asda. It's a big Asda.
Wow.
It's funny though, because looking at it, I wouldn't have guessed it's an Asda. I didn't know what it was looking at it.
Okay. Well, I have a bit of intel on this too. So actually, at the Grace Petrie gig, I think before one of her songs, she mentioned something she liked about being British, because the album that the tour is supporting is an album about, you know, how being British kind of sucks, and so you want to have one song with some optimistic notes, and one of the pros of being British was having a B&Q club card.
Oh.
So as it turns out, B&Q have club cards, which, because we were wondering if club card is like a trademark, if it's possible for another institution to have club cards that isn't Tesco. And this proves that yes, there could be a supermarket with a club card, or specifically a club of which you may have a card. So it's B&Q Club, of which you may be a card-carrying member of B&Q Club.
Card, yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the club card comes from. Well, with Tesco, club card is a single word. So I think that sort of bridges the theorising we've done. And basically, this is a supermarket which is not Tesco, but they do have a club. And as such, people may carry cards for that club, but it's not club card, one word.
Yeah, they're living in the height of loyalty card memberships, as I think we're entering the decline as the co-op have decided to change their model of membership.
I think we're entering like when people talk about late stage capitalism, we're entering that, but for club cards but for loyalty systems, because now a lot of stores will have discounts where you need the card to get the discount.
Yeah, they've
entered the desperation phase. I think that's the sign of decline, is sort of more open hostility, because what else can you do? And I think you're right, Zach. I think you're right in that observation.
So to sum up, I'm sorry for spreading misinformation, and also I apologise for this podcast about this podcast about this show that's supposed to be telling groundbreaking queer stories is so caught up in supermarket loyalties. So, well, thanks, Jack, for that. I was going to say that question. That's not really a question. That was a demand. I'll throw it back to you, Louis. Any other listener thoughts, questions, queries, complaints, demands for apologies?
Yes. So we've been two guys talking about guys. As much as my pronouns are he, they, I was still male socialized. So, you know, It's definitely been a very male-centric podcast, but thankfully I was able to get a bit of a female perspective on this show. So I asked one of the women closest to me in my life, I asked her, what did you sort of think of the show? Do you have any thoughts, comments on it? And she told me that as a straight girl, I've never been as infatuated or heartbroken over a gay guy as Stuart. Like, he is undeniably one of the most sexy men of all time, regardless of sexuality. I think that's great. I think that's the perspective we've been needing on this podcast. Do you have any thoughts about Stuart's sexiness, Zac?
I think there definitely is an allure regarding Stuart, and I do think there is... Okay, well, I'll tell you something interesting. I was speaking to a script editor from Key Street Productions, which, if you don't know, is the company now run by Nicola Shindler. Nicola Shindler, who is the producer of Queer as Folk, who used to run Red Productions, the company that made Queer as Folk, and they now have been replaced. She sort of sold off Red and started Key Street as Red's successor. And I was chatting to a script editor, and I was basically saying, when you're reading scripts, when you're looking at things to take to commissioners to get made, what are you looking for? And she said, it's the characters. It's about, can a writer write the character of the decade, a character that is so unique, that's not been done before, that is going to stick in people's memories. And although I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe Stuart as a character of the decade, I do think there is something within him that I don't think I've ever seen in any other character on screen. There's just some sort of unique energy to him. Now, that clearly is manifesting in sexiness for this particular viewer. For me, it's more of a sort of, I want to say confusion, but it's not. It's a confusion. It's a curiosity. The same kind of curiosity I think the character of Nathan feels towards Stuart as well. So I do think there's definitely an allure. I don't know why I'm struggling so much with saying that word. An allure with Stuart. I don't know, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of Stuart's sexiness is definitely kind of from the way he acts. I think just the guy on his own, might not be like the sexiest person ever, but he has such confidence and, draw that, like, when you say about like writing that perfect character, it's, the character of Stuart is sexiness personified.
I've got one more question from a listener, and this is from Pip. Pip sent us a message over on Instagram, which I should say to all listeners, feel free to do at any time. You don't have to wait for a bonus episode to send us your thoughts and opinions. And Pip says, how do you guys think Queer as Folk has paved the way for contemporary shows about queer lives? It's a fantastic question, Pip. It's a fantastic question, Pip.
Yeah.
Louis and I were discussing before the podcast how exactly we were going to tackle this big question. The way I think about it is, it's undeniable that Queer as Folk was groundbreaking. It started a conversation, and I think, unfortunately, in the society in which we exist, and particularly in the late 90s, the first time someone created a show that centred on queer/gay stories, there was going to be backlash, but it was sort of a moment of sort of breaking the seal, shedding the water, letting that first moment happen, and then it could open up. I think what's particularly interesting about what Queer as Folk is in itself, and we've touched upon this before, it is a show about 3 white, middle-class, gay, young men. It's not particularly diverse in the type of queer stories that it tells. There are elements of diversity in it, but it certainly, now looking at it, is lacking. It focuses a lot on the concept of friendships and casual sex, and not very much else. If I'm perfectly honest, it doesn't touch upon HIV, and it doesn't look at other identities. Now, I think the next show that Russell T Davies works on, which is Bob and Rose, which is undeniably would not exist without Queer as Folk, because he wouldn't have got his next commission to do his next quote-unquote gay show. Bob and Rose is a story with slightly more nuance, and it attempts to tell a very different story about a different kind of queerness. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because, well, the next series of the Davis on Davis podcast is us discussing Bob and Rose. And that had its own backlash, something we'll get into. But I think it's step by step, even looking within Russell T Davies' own work, Queer as Folk was step one in allowing his next story. And we can see that lead all the way to It's a Sin, for instance, where finally he decides to write a show about HIV. As a more confident writer, we see him have more diverse perspectives, to have more different characters. And I think that then undeniably has allowed other writers with other distinct perspectives to come forward and write their own shows about different queer lives. For instance, a black or female lesbian perspective, or a bi perspective, or more actually, really importantly, a trans perspective. And most people, I think, well, I would say homophobes would have struggled with the idea of a gay show, let alone a gay show told by someone who belongs to yet another marginalised community. So I think Queer as Folk was really important in opening the gateway. It's a fantastic show, but not perfect, and it's not the definitive queer story. It's the first of many.
I think because Queer as Folk was adapted into a US series, I wonder if that was sort of then able to not so much sort of inspire, or maybe inspire future shows, but not necessarily, but make them more likely to be commissioned. But then also, if he hadn't written it in the UK, would a similar show have come about in the US in the early 2000s anyway? That is the question. Yeah, and I think what you say about sort of wanting more diverse representation and being able to represent different things within the queer community, I think Cucumber and Banana, I would say that was probably the turning point in his own repertoire, where he was like, I want to make a show that is all about the diversity within a community. Banana is a show which covers a different character every week as an anthology.
Fantastic. We don't have anything else, do we?
I don't think so. I think that wraps up Queer as Folk.
Well, it almost wraps up Queer as Folk, because I think we've got a special little treat for you, haven't we, Louis? I'm not saying you as in the treat's not for you, Louis. It's for our lovely listener.
Yeah, but it's from me. It's the outtakes of the podcast. It's all the clips which we cut out of the episodes. And what's fun is you can listen to them and you can wonder why was this cut out? And with some of them, you won't need to wonder as long as others. Some things were for pacing, some things were for a more clear reason. Yeah,
and listen to the end, because it will make you look at even this bonus episode in a whole new light. So listen to the end, dear listener.
But before that, let's sign off. So I have been Louis Davis,
and I've been Zac Copeland-Green,
and join us in 2 weeks for the first edition of Bob and Rose, featuring a very special guest. Yeah, we're excited to move on to new ventures. It's like we've completed Kingdom 1 of Mario, and now we're going on to Kingdom 2.
Does the difficulty ramp up? Who knows?
It's
been a while since I played Mario.
So you can follow us on Davis on Instagram, and you can follow me on Louis on Air on Instagram, Louis on the Air on Twitter, and check out Lit Lab London for the science communication stuff I do. Zac, do you have anything you want to plug this episode?
It's a bonus episode, so I don't get paid to make bits, sorry.
That's fine. Well, yeah. Join us again. Oh, yeah, also, we are going to be going down to a more sustainable production schedule, but this means that we can make this podcast forever and ever.
See you in a fortnight, guys.
See you in a fortnight. And here are some outtakes. I mean, this thing, like, I don't see people talking about the whole, like, computers do exactly what you... There's this thing that computers do exactly what you tell them, and if you're not specific enough, then they'll just do something using pre-existing settings or whatever that won't be quite what you're looking for. And I always see that discussed when discussing the mathematical theory of algorithms. I don't see it so much in things that are more about actual programming. This is odd. This is an odd, like, science communication insight, because this thing, I do find myself making a lot of observations about the way that science is communicated. Some aspects are a bit peculiar, but that's a completely different podcast. So I think we should move on.
And you could listen to, unless it's a fan theory that you're trying to say that Nathan is secretly an android.
You know what? Yeah, that's definitely what I was getting at. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll keep that in mind, listener, when we're talking about the character of Nathan. Louis believes that he is a robot.
Yes.
So you were quite right.
Yeah.
He comes in in Vince's room.
That does. Yeah, I realised that. Yeah, that does.
Yeah, you nail on the head right there.
Yeah, and then he comes in Vince's room again. So
You're the one that edits this podcast. You could edit yourself into that.
Could you just quickly say I agree with Louis completely?
No. I don't. We live in a day and age where I can't say anything for fear of what might happen to my voice.
Well, I mean, you make the social media stuff, so you can chop it up a bit further if you feel slighted.
And I can also post any stuff I want on there to our massive following. So yeah, don't cross me. Let's just not cross each other. Let's just watch some TV and be happy.
Absolutely.
And of course, you can listen to us talk about this at great length on our other podcast where we talk at great length about musicals. So that's why I'm going to cut us short and say, let's talk about Curious Folk. Otherwise, we will be here all day.
Actually, just one last question with the Mean Girls. What about casting? Was the casting good?
Okay, so...
Because the original cast is very iconic, so...
So I would say Angry Rice, who plays Katie, who is... was originally Lindsay Lohan's part. She's probably the most miscast person because it is a musical and I don't think she is a particularly musical actress. And that's where I think a lot of the complaints about the singing came from. As for Renee Rapp as Regina George, I would go straight for Renee Rapp. I am in love with her. I'm absolutely obsessed with that. She is everything. I actually think and you might actually cancel me for this. I think she might be a more iconic Regina George than Rachel McAdams was. She just came on stage, sang the words "My name is Regina George and I'm a massive deal," and I was like, your name is Regina George and you are a massive deal and I love you and I would do crazy things for you. Oh my god.
I don't have strong opinions about Mean Girls, so I'll take your word for it.
Although obviously it's bold of a TV show to introduce new characters at episode 6, but I'm handling it well.
I know Tooting and Ballum had to are sort of right now in a bit of... Actually, I'm going to cut that because that's even too nerdy for me. Okay, I'm going to go get it. Okay, I'm going to jump in with some context here. On the Crossrail 2 plan, there was a station proposed for Tooting Broadway, but then that got moved to Ballum. And in my opinion, that would not be as good. I think Tooting Broadway has more demand for transport and more stuff in it. And so I sort of came to my senses and realised, no, I should not talk about transport planning in London on this podcast. Come on, Louis, get it together. And so I stopped. But I just wanted to give you that context. So episode 4 is done, where we covered episode 6 of Curious Folk, because we realised after 2 episodes that we actually should be doing 1 episode per podcast, because it just works better for formatting.
And we have so much to say.
We do.
When the Davis on Davis podcast gets cancelled for regionalism, it will go on with only one host.
I mean, I think we've already been doing regionalism with our sort of focus on, a Welsh guy who lived in Manchester for a while. We've been focusing in on that. We've been talking about the regions.
We have, but in such a positive light. The other day, I was listening back to one of our podcast episodes and I was waxing lyrical about my desire to be Welsh,
Yes.
And I don't know how put on that was for the podcast. What a strange thing to say. Anyway, before I say any other strange things about routes in the UK, shall we talk a bit about Curious Folk episode 7? How about you, Louis? Have you done something more exciting than pick up a microphone? I think I have done more exciting things. Here's the thing, Louis.
Yeah.
I can't because we record these in a funny, and I know you don't like me peeking behind the curtain, but we record these in a funny order. So I now can't remember what I said I did on the last episode, and if I want to repeat myself.
You'd been ill.
I was ill, so I'm no longer ill. And I think last time we recorded, I was staying in the south at my boyfriend's house, and since I've come home, and I have been working very hard. I'm no longer ill. I've got some things in the way, but I think big exciting plans coming up. But I think I'm going to save them to talk about in a future episode. I think
we might as well skip forward a bit, because the following day he actually does come out in a really dramatic fashion. His co-worker, the main one, the gossiping one, he like goes up to her and acts as if he's just like asking her for like some stock inventory or something, but then turns out he's talking about a guy with the nicest ass.
And he's like, can you put in a good word for me, because I have fancied him for ages.
Yeah.
And she walks away with shock on her face.
He's taken hold of his narrative, you know, he's doing it because he wants to, which I think is quite beautiful, and that's a very nice closure to this arc.
Can I speak out of the podcast for a second? I think we shouldn't have done that jump there. Sorry.
Okay.
Just because I think...
That's fine. I'll cut it out.
Stuff about the other stuff that happens to him as a character in the episode, I think that informs him.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't know what you think. I think it's so far ahead in the episode, I think for a reason, because it's after the breakup.
Yeah.
And then his sort of journey as a character.
Okay, that's fine. We'll go from that to the art gallery then. No, as I say, I think that is better than my one of just like that's the thing is I'm saying everyone Quebec with the surname Fortin is related, you know, because we're all a bit inbred.
And now you live in Brighton.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything.
But it's funny because like they both have invites, so they could both have their own +1s. But she's saying you need to be each other's +1. Does
Stuart have an invite? Because she has an invite. Hazel has an invite.
Oh right.
It's Ms. Hazel Tyler and guest, and then Mr. Vince Tyler as guest.
Right. I thought it said like Vince Tyler and guest, Stuart Jones and guest. No. Okay. Yeah. I get it now. Yeah. I'm working on a scavenger hunt set in Manchester, and one of the challenges that's been come up with is eat from Greggs in every borough.
There is a Greggs in Didsbury.
But that's just interesting because like I was like, what exactly does borough mean? But actually, it's like they're quite big. Then I assume the boroughs.
So you've got Manchester City, which is in the middle, and then sort of you have the other boroughs outside. So you've got Trafford, you've got Salford. Although you don't want to get into the whole Salford debate. You look at a map and it's Manchester's a conurbation, and I could give you a whole lecture on like the very unique geography of Manchester because it is a city that's grown out of much smaller urban areas as opposed to London, which has just grown from one big thing that continues to grow outward.
Okay.
Listen to my geography podcast.
I think with London, quite a few of the suburbs did start out as like small villages, but I feel like it's only once London reaches them do they become big.
Yeah.
And so I get what you mean by like London growing out from one core, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Manchester's different to that. It sounds like the West Midlands. I think the West Midlands is very kind of polycentric like that.
So back to Vince and his dad.
Trying to think of a joke about the TV show Utopia. Can't think of one. So anyway, Jessica Hyde shows up at the party. That's the joke. Porn is like famously big on like stuff that like makes you feel is this discriminatory? Is this? There are experts who have written papers about this. It's a whole thing. I might cut that bit out. I'm not going. I don't want to go anywhere with that. You know what I mean? Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, as I say, you know, there's 5 series, and I did not get through all of them because they keep recasting characters, they keep sort of changing the characters, and then so one character leaves, and then another character comes in. But it's like very obviously the replacement, like very much fills the exact same hole. They don't feel like there's possibly more than one hole to fill, and you could like shape it up a bit. And so you just get a bit bored because it's like I just can't care about any of these characters. I'm sorry.
I am Zac, and I've been inspired by Vince throughout Curious Folk, and I have decided to set up my own supermarket. Actually, I really want to set up an indie supermarket. So I've
before we leave, I forgot to mention. Okay, so basically, there's a moment
where they mention Tesco.
Yes. Vince says if they upgraded their streaming media, they could whip Tesco's. So that means that this supermarket is not Tesco, despite it having a club card.
I was actually doing a funny.
It's Besco.
A funny story. I was going to pretend to be a listener and write into next episode and complain about that. But you got there before me, Louis.
Do you want me to not mention this, and so we can still talk about it next episode? I don't know how many people are going to write in next episode.
I'll think of something. Don't worry. Yeah, so me, so what was I saying?